Hello everyone, I'm Gao. Making sourdough bread involves a lot of details. In today's video, I'll focus on two key points: gluten and fermentation. Let's talk about gluten first. Sourdough bread typically uses bread flour or all-purpose flour. But even with the same protein content, the strength of the gluten can vary significantly. For example, these two doughs have the same protein content and 80% hydration. The gluten in the dough on the left is very loose and can stretch quite long. On the right, the gluten is tight. Bleached bread flour or bleached all-purpose flours tend to be tighter, while this organic all-purpose flour from Costco is not tight. All these flours can make beautiful sourdough bread, but the handling process will be different, which I'll explain later. For beginners, adding a portion of tight gluten flour can help you make the process easier. I've put together a PDF file including a detailed recipe and my years of experience making sourdough bread. You can click the link in the description box below to purchase it. Now, let's get started. Today I'm using the organic all-purpose flour, which produces loose gluten. Mix the dough until there is no dry flour left. It is a very wet and sticky dough. Let it sit for 1 to 3 hours to allow the flour to fully absorb the water and start forming gluten. Now, let's look at the levain, which I prepared the night before. This is sourdough starter, mixed with flour and water. Its feeding ratio is about 1 to 2 to 2. The levain is basically the same as a sourdough starter, but in a larger quantity and used for fermenting the bread dough. Place it in a jar, and after 8 to 9 hours, it will have risen to its peak. It's best to mix the levain with the dough within 12 hours. After letting the dough rest for an hour, add 200 grams of the levain and start mixing the dough at low speed. Once it's combined, increase the speed. The dough is quite soft, so I usually set the mixer to speed 4. After 7 to 8 minutes, the dough will start to come together. At this point, add the salt and continue mixing at speed 4 for another 3 to 5 minutes. The finished dough should be very smooth and shiny. After a few minutes, you should be able to stretch the dough into a thin, translucent membrane without tearing easily. If you accidentally poke a hole, the edges should be smooth. Achieving this level of gluten formation is the foundation for the next steps and ensures a good oven spring. Let me show you another mixing scenario. Because the dough is highly hydrated, if the mixer is fast, the dough can turn into a thick paste. At this point, don't throw it out. Continue mixing at high speed, and eventually, the gluten will reconnect, and the dough will come back together. Once the dough has formed again, add salt and mix for another 5 minutes. You can still get a smooth and shiny surface. This dough took about 20 minutes of mixing in total. At this point, you've nailed the first key aspect of sourdough bread, using the right flour and developing a strong gluten structure. Now let's move on to the second key point, fermentation. Wet your hands in the containers, then divide the dough. Once the levain is mixed into the dough, you need to start counting the fermentation time. My fermentation temperature is 73 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 23 to 24 degrees Celsius. The total room temperature fermentation time is 6 to 7 hours. After rounding the dough, cover it with plastic wrap and let it ferment for 2 hours. After 2 hours, the gluten have relaxed. We'll do a full stretch and fold to fully tighten the gluten. Wipe the table with a damp paper towel. And wet your hands as well. Stretch each corner of the dough outward. When stretching, follow the strength of the gluten. Gently pull it into a rectangle, then fold it. Sometimes you'll fold in some air bubbles. If you're aiming for a bread with large holes, you can leave them. But if you want a lace-like crumb, you should avoid large bubbles. After folding, the table should be quite clean with very little flour residue, which indicates good gluten development. On the contrary, if there's a lot of flour left on the table, it means the dough wasn't developed well. Place the dough back into the container and continue fermenting. Now we'll do coil folds in the container to tighten the gluten. The number of folds and the intervals between them depend on the tightness of the gluten. Let's first look at the dough with looser gluten. After 1 hour, the dough in the container has relaxed and spread out to fill the container. You'll need to do a coil fold every hour for 3 times. This is the first fold. In the first 3 hours, the fermentation produces small bubbles, so you can still handle the dough roughly. In the next 3 hours, the bubbles will get larger, so you need to handle it gently to avoid pressing out the gas. 1 hour later, do the second fold. Gluten and fermentation work together. At room temperature, over-fermentation will cause the gluten to lose its strength and collapse. However, natural yeast ferments very slowly, so during the fermentation process, we use folding to tighten the gluten, keeping its strength while allowing the yeast to ferment fully. Another hour later, the gluten has started to tighten. This is also the last hour of fermentation. The gluten and fermentation are both nearing their peak, perfectly aligned. This is the last fold. Let the dough rest for 1 more hour, then we will do the final shaping. Now let's look at the dough with tighter gluten. This is a different dough made with half tight gluten flour. While the loose dough had filled the container in 1 hour, this dough still hadn't fully relaxed after 2 hours. For this type of dough, you only need to do 1 or half a fold after 2 hours. Then proceed to final shaping. Later, I'll show you how overfolding can affect the final bread. For beginners, tighter gluten doughs are easier to control and less likely to collapse during fermentation. Now for the final shaping. At this point, the dough volume has visibly increased. Dust the dough, the work surface, and the proofing baskets with plenty of flour. Turn the dough out onto the table. There's no dry flour on the dough surface. Gently fold the sides over. Roll the dough up gently. Tightening the surface gluten. Seal the edges. Then place the dough, seam side up, into a well-floured proofing basket. Cover with plastic wrap and refrigerate overnight. The next day, it's time to bake. I'll show you 3 methods to bake sourdough at home. The first method, place a baking stone on the right side of the oven. On the bottom left side, place a tray with lava rocks. Preheat the oven for half an hour. Once the oven is hot, take the bread out of the fridge and turn it out onto parchment paper. Scoring controls the direction of the oven spring. Ideally, make the cut in one smooth motion. Notice the angle of the cut. After scoring, you can lift the edge slightly. Place the dough on the far left of the stone. Add 1 or 2 ice cubes to the right side to generate more steam. cover with a large roasting pan. The pan doesn't need to be preheated. The pan and the stone should be staggered so steam can flow under the pan. Place a towel over the oven door to prevent the glass from cracking. Then pour hot water onto the stones and close the door quickly. Set a timer for 25 minutes. After 25 minutes, remove the roasting pan. At this point, the bread has taken shape with a beautiful oven spring. The color should be white. If it has browned already, your oven temperature or humidity isn't correct, and you'll need to adjust. Next, lower the oven temperature to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, 232 degrees Celsius, and bake for another 6 to 8 minutes. The bread is done. Look at this beautiful bread. The crust is golden and crisp, with a perfect shape and a well-developed ear. The second method only requires a baking stone and a bowl. The bowl should be just large enough to fit the baked bread. Once the oven is preheated, place the bread on the stone and put some ice cubes on either side for extra steam. Then cover with the bowl. The bowl doesn't need to be preheated. Same temperature, same time. After baking, the bread have good oven spring, though the ear may not lift as much since the bowl is not tall enough. The third method is using a cast iron pot. If your oven heats from the bottom, place an empty tray on the bottom rack to prevent the bread from burning at the bottom. Put the pot and tray in the oven to preheat. Once the temperature is reached, place the dough in the pot and cover it with the lid. Use the same temperature and time as the other methods. You can also bake a beautiful loaf of bread. After letting it cool completely, slice the bread and take a look at the inside. You'll see a very beautiful, lace-like crumb structure. The overall bread isn't too dense, nor does it have overly large holes. Each air pocket has trapped air and set within the bread. This is due to the strong gluten structure and full fermentation, forming the perfect lace-like structure. Now let's look at another loaf. This one is made from the tight dough we showed earlier, with only one fold. Its crumb structure is more irregular. But if you closely examine the small air pockets around the larger holes, each bubble is open, indicating proper fermentation. Comparing the crumb structures of these two loaves, you'll notice that the more folds you do, the more organized the air pockets become. Next, let's look at some common problems when making sourdough bread. The first issue is overfolding. The loaf seems to have good oven spring and an ear, with a nice color. However, the loaf is smaller in size. When you cut it open, you'll notice that while the large air pockets look good, the small bubbles have all burst, making the crumb appear very dense. This dough had very tight gluten and underwent 3 folds. Each time, it couldn't be stretched far and was forcibly folded. The excessive folding steps squeezed out the bubbles produced by fermentation, preventing the loaf from rising properly. Next, I'll show you what over-fermentation and under-fermentation look like. Here's a loaf that was over-fermented. First, look at its shape. It's a bit larger, but not full, and somewhat flat. When you cut it open, you'll see that the large air pockets are all at the top. However, the overall crumb still looks quite soft. It's still edible. Now, here's an under-fermented loaf. The size didn't increase much, but it still has some oven spring and an ear. When you slice it open, the large air pockets are easy to bake, but the smaller air bubbles look very dense. This is a clear sign of under-fermentation. Let's compare these 3 loaves. The one in the middle is the properly fermented loaf. Finally, the most common issue is a collapsed loaf. There's barely any oven spring and no ear. When you cut it open, the small bubbles are also very dense. In this case, the gluten has collapsed. There are many reasons for a collapsed loaf, but we can avoid it by strengthening the gluten. You can do this by adding some flour with tighter gluten and kneading it until it reaches the thin, elastic film stage. At this point, the gluten is very strong and has a high tolerance. Looking back at the previous failed loaves, whether over-fermented, under-fermented, or over-folded, they all still had oven spring and developed ears because I used flour with tighter gluten in the dough. Once you become familiar with the techniques and master gluten development and fermentation, you won't be limited by the type of flour. No matter what flour you use, you can still achieve a beautiful crumb structure with perfect flavor and texture. Thank you for watching. I'm Gao, and I'll see you in the next episode.